Well, welcome to this, my 74th LinkedIn Live, and today I'm talking about economic and financial considerations for bidders. It does seem that the sort of money, the commercials come into bids, they feature in a number of main ways. Obviously, there's a price that you're bidding for the contract, but there is also your own company's financial health, and that is obviously looked at by buyers as well. So today I'm delighted to be joined by somebody I know very well, Carrie Campbell, who is a partner at Thomson Cooper Accountants. And Carrie is also the non-executive finance director for my own business, AM Bid. So welcome to our LinkedIn Live studio, Carrie. And can you begin, please, by telling us a bit about yourself and your career to date?
Yes, good afternoon. Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for having me along this lunchtime. So I didn't have the stereotypical path into accountancy. I left school in 6th year, much to the annoyance of many of my teachers. I was adamant I didn't want to go to university, but I quickly secured a position as an office junior with one of the national accountancy firms within a month of leaving. I very quickly moved into the small business team and qualified as an accountant in 2006. I had moved by that time to a small firm called Bill Hay & Co, Bill being one of the former partners at the national firm, and I went on there to become the practice manager and a director. In 2014, with the expansion into Edinburgh, Thomson Cooper took over Bill Hay & Co, and thus I became a partner at Thomson Cooper here and in charge of the Edinburgh office. So basically, I've spent my whole working life supporting and advising SME business owners in all areas of their business. And from a personal perspective, in late to 2020, I was also appointed joint head of people operations here at TC. So that's my path to date.
Very good. And I think we first met at the Mid Lothian and East Lothian Chamber of Commerce about 2015. So I've known your work for quite a considerable time, and Thomson Cooper have been AM Bid's accountants. We're nearly at the end of our 2nd year of that now, so, and doing a great job too. So Carrie, bidders for contracts need to be able to demonstrate that they are well-run businesses. What would you say characterises a well-run business from a financial perspective?
So the indicators I would look for, so obviously as an accountant, the first protocol would be to look at the accounts. So I would focus actually on the balance sheet and be looking at whether you have positive working capital, that you have good stock turnover, from a practical sense, not looking at the accounts, so looking at your debtor and WIP control and ensuring that cash is not tied up unnecessarily. And then I would be drawing to the profit. So probably the reverse of what everyone was expecting, but just because you're making profit doesn't necessarily mean you're running a good business. From a practical sense, I'd be looking for one that has good financial reporting quarterly, up-to-date records, where the owners have their finger on the pulse. They can tell you their gross profit percentages, net profit percentages, and their break-even points, that they devote time to managing their cash flow is also a good point to look for.
Okay, so often, I'm thinking about maybe smaller businesses. They're very busy doing their day job, but what are the benefits for businesses in actually bringing in external help with bookkeeping, payroll, management accounts, and the statutory accounts as well?
Yeah, so from that perspective, talking back to looking about the financial indicators of a business, you're looking for things to be up to date and timely and accurate, and often outsourcing those preparation of accounts and bookkeeping and payroll supports that. So 96% of businesses fail because they don't have visibility of their numbers. So outsourcing to us or to any accountant gives you peace of mind, one, that they're accurate and correct, because the cloud accounting products can produce financial reports at touch of a button, but if they're not accurate and timely, then it is a pretty worthless exercise. From a bidder's perspective, they should be using management accounts like that to consider whether they should be going for the next big bid. So that really, and probably from an owner's perspective, peace of mind around legislation. So when you think about payroll, that gives them peace of mind that it's been submitted correctly and on time, and they're not going to fall foul of HMRC. From an owner's perspective, I think time saving, because many owners that I speak to will try to do these tasks themselves in the belief that it saves them money and time. But ultimately, I say to them, well, what could you be doing with the time you're spending? I'm pretty sure you could be using that time more efficiently to work on your business than doing your accounts or your invoicing or your receipts or your VAT processing, for instance. So these really are. And then some people will say, well, what if I hire a person internally to do that? Well, ultimately, by outsourcing that service, you will save money because you don't have the commitment that an employment contract brings and costs that go along with that.
Yes, and I can definitely speak to the benefits of that. You know, having set up bid nearly 7 years ago, I actually interviewed accountants prior to me setting up the business, and interviewed 3 different companies at that point. And one of the accountants said to me, I can teach you how to do most of this, and then we're only doing a small bit of it around the statutory. And I said, while I'm sure you're a good teacher and while I'm probably a reasonable learner, it's not where I want to be. I want to be helping organisations to win bids. So I want to spend my time doing that, and anything that is, you know, extraneous to that, as it were, I'd rather get people that specialise in that. So that's kind of what I've done with bid, and it has definitely worked for us. We're going to talk now about what procurement are looking for when they're actually assessing, let's say, qualification within bids. So bidders are often assessed on criteria such as credit rating, the strength of their balance sheet, an asset ratio, and of course, profitability. So what steps can businesses take, Carrie, to ensure that these indicators are not pointing in the wrong direction?
So there's ultimately very easy steps that they could take. So for instance, good credit control and chasing their debtors is ultimately step number 1 to ensure that they have cash available. Obviously make a profit and take action when they see that profit starts to decline. So they're early things they can do. Paying their creditors within the agreed credit terms, because that all keeps their credit score up to date, and obviously HMRC and any other liabilities that they have, and not tying up cash in stock or work in progress. And of course, the ultimate thing from all of that is to monitor these on a regular basis, timely analysis around this to make sure things aren't going in the wrong direction.
Yeah, very true. It's all about knowing your numbers, and accountants can definitely help you with that as well. But if these indicators are not as good as they should be, so say we've got a situation where the indicators are not so good, there's not time to put these corrective actions in place, perhaps during the bid, because the bid's due in next week, for example. What other evidence could bidders offer to clients to provide them a bit of assurance around economic and financial stability?
Yeah, well, you've ultimately identified, Andrew, what many businesses will be facing. The last 12 months have meant that many businesses' financials will not be in a position of what they want them to be, and that's been ultimately, to an extent, out with their control. The procurement team, as you say, are looking for comfort that the contract won't fail, as well as the price. So things that you can do are things like business plans and cash flow forecasts as part of your bid and tender. So to show the client that you have an understanding of their market, you know the challenges that market will face, and that you have a plan to resolve and mitigate the risks that are involved with that contract. And that's ultimately when you don't have the historic information to tick the box that they're looking for, something that you can proactively do to help support your bid.
Very good. Some great tips there. I'm going to put you into a bid situation now. Just imagine a bidder's bidding for, say, a 4-year construction sector contract, but it could apply to any sector really. What should they be taking into account when preparing their tender prices for this 4-year contract?
That's a great question. It's very tricky because obviously there's a number of economic and financial considerations. If you're looking at something over a 4-year period ahead, you would just love to have that crystal ball, wouldn't you? So for that instance, if you think no one could have predicted the situation we've had in the last 12 months, so I think what you've got to focus on is that the detail of the pricing. So don't just look at your gross margin, i.e. your materials, your costs, your employees, but you've got to consider the indirect costs that could go along, your overheads that could increase because of the contract that you win. So for instance, you may have to get a bigger office, you may have to buy new equipment, new vehicles, etc., increased accountancy fees, software fees, because you need the support to maintain those contracts. So I think those are key things that you really have to think about when you're thinking of your price for your bid. Otherwise, you would be adding to the top line, but ultimately you could actually be eroding the bottom line at a quicker pace. You also have to think about the contract itself and what actual pricing model you need to use. So should it be a cost plus a margin basis, or actually is it what you'd refer to as value based? So is it a selling price of what they're prepared to pay for the service you're offering? And then obviously in a contract that's 3 or 4 years, you've got economies of scale to think about. So the ultimate value of the course of a period of years that contract will bring to you should be thought about, and not just what profit you're driving from year one. It should be the value over the course of the period.
Yeah, there's just so many things to take into account, isn't there? Thinking about risk, thinking about, obviously Brexit has had a bit of an impact in the construction sector for materials, and COVID as well, sort of on top of that too. Also, Brexit's had an effect in terms of access to perhaps foreign labour as well. Inflation is something else that people have to think about. There's just so many things. I think what's important as well is to look at what are the change control mechanisms within the contract. So if they're asking for prices, say they were asking prices to be held for 2 years, and then it was going to be a possible increase after that. What is that increase based on? Is it a particular price index that it's based on? And also, what are the change control provisions as well? So if something like a pandemic, strikes, something completely, that wasn't foreseen, and the impacts it has, how's that going to impact on the contract and the pricing? And is the contractor able to go back to the client and negotiate, at that point due to these situations? Do you know what? I think we're all a lot more aware now of things that can happen. And while we'd like to maybe think that the pandemic is a once in a lifetime occasion, there could actually be other things coming up, whether similar, or it could be the climate emergency producing, whether it's flooding or adverse weather. We've had a beast from the east a few years ago. I mean, there are things that can really impact us. So a lot to think about, and a lot to lose as well, for businesses, particularly small businesses. If they get this wrong, they can be put out of business because they've gone in at a price that's not allowed, sufficient headroom for these things. But of course, if they price too high, they might not win the work. But some work might not be worth winning if it is going to put your company at severe risk by winning it.
Yeah.
Now, accountancy has got a lot of figures. How do you help achieve insights into what the numbers are actually telling us?
Well, I think the key there is actually, ironically, to look beyond the numbers. So how I interpret what is going on in a business is by getting to know the client, their business, understand how it operates, its clients, its team, the sector, the seasonality, and building up ultimately what the owners want from that business. Do they want it to be a lifestyle business, a growth business, or something that they can pass on to future generations? So I think you have to look at taking a combination of all these factors really to interpret what the numbers show, and that's by understanding what ultimately they're trying to get out of their business is ultimately how I can show whether they're achieving that or not. And that's where I think I'm not afraid to have an open conversation with a client when something just doesn't look right, and perhaps that their expectations are too high.
Okay. Now, you work with a lot of businesses of various sizes. What financial impacts have you seen for businesses due to COVID-19? And do you think we're through the worst of these now?
Well, there's no doubt about it. The pandemic brought fast moving and unexpected variables. Lots of companies went into crisis mode. They managed that, they mobilised, and many are now on a stability path and looking forward and have been for the last 3 to 4 months. There are success stories who acted early, they survived, and they now have ultimately a better business model, better net profit, and clearer growth path. There are, however, yet some businesses that have still to see the full financial effect. So when you think of that, they know they have made losses because they've been closed, they've had restrictions to what they can do, and that's obviously stereotypically your retail, tourism, hospitality sector. But there are many smaller feeder businesses to this sector, and many of these will have taken on additional debt to keep the businesses alive, and therefore how quickly they can increase their trading ultimately to service that debt will be crucial. And that's why, although we're over quite a hurdle in it, there are still many months ahead before we can see the full financial impacts to many of the small businesses or that I look after.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously the government's provided a lot of help. There's been furlough and loans, etc. But at some point loans have to be paid back, and if there's been holidays on rents and different things, that'll obviously stop as well, and the businesses will have to be trading very well, because it isn't just covering their normal costs, it may be covering some of that debt as well. So I think you've separately, Carrie, as well, highlighted the importance of managing your cash flow and getting very, very good payments from clients, and recognizing early if there's any payment problem and taking action. Because some companies, some ways that some companies survive is by delaying, paying their creditors. So you just have to make sure, as a small business, you're not caught out by that, really. Yeah. COVID-19 has probably changed the way that many of us are working as well. The working environment, the office, working from home, etc. So how has COVID-19 changed the way that Thomson Cooper works? And will some or all of these changes end up being permanent, do you think?
Well, as you've correctly identified there, yes, the biggest change is that we had to mobilise a workforce and get them working from home to comply with the legislation. But it also changed how we communicate with our clients, how we communicate with our team, our marketing, our events programmes. All of this basically had to have a refresh. The biggest change as well in a short term is workload, because we had all the extra work with business plans and loan applications and the CRGS scheme, which continues, and we have to continue to provide support in that area. So if I'm being honest, yes, it's been the hardest out of 25 years in the industry. So obviously from a processes point of view, so apart from our teams continue to work from home where possible, and we continue to meet our clients by video link, Whether these changes will remain permanent, I think, will be driven by people, i.e. our clients, the business requirements, and our teams. The new normal, we don't yet know in full what that looks like. So I think the one thing that I can say is that it will be a constantly moving position as we all try to adapt to what we want moving forward.
Yeah, I think a lot of the big companies are talking about, come to the office if you want to do that, come when you need to, but you don't have to be there, 5 days a week. And in fact, many of them are starting to think it's going to be maybe people being there 2 days a week or 3 days a week. And it's kind of probably almost expected that offices on a Monday and a Friday are going to be a lot quieter. If people do choose to work from home some days, they would probably typically take Mondays and Fridays, but they may take other days as well. And there are some people that want to be in the office every day, and there's other people that almost never want to be there. So it's quite challenging as well for business leaders to obviously listen to their people, do the right thing for their clients, do the right thing for the business, and just sort of keep everybody happy in a world that is changing, quite rapidly. Just thinking about the rapid changes, what effect is new technology having on the accountancy profession?
Well, there's no getting away. The advancement and introduction of cloud accounting software and all the apps that go along with it has transformed the profession and will continue to do so for some time to come as they're constantly evolving. When they're set up and operated correctly, they can streamline processes and enhance our ability to support and collaborate with clients in real time. So they're definitely a plus point. Personally, I love the ability to be able to jump on and look at a software and say, okay, look at the results. Are you on target? Are you meeting budgets? How's cash flow going? What's the tax bill going to be looking like? All those things stereotypically that accountant loves to get their teeth into. So, I mean, I think they have changed. The value piece for us now comes from that type of work, and that's where the clients see value. Compliance work will always be important because it gives owners peace of mind that everything's being run correctly. But yeah, the value piece moving forward will be real-time support, and therefore the technology will drive and assist that. Tax planning, however, is yet to see technology take that into account. So I think that will always be something that we will be moving forward with on a personal note.
Okay, now I want to just come back to cash flow and just ask you here, why is monitoring cash flow so important for businesses, and what tips do you have on this for these uncertain times?
So cash is king, and we all have to treat it with the respect it deserves. If you don't have any cash and you don't keep care of it, you won't have a business. So that's ultimately where the point needs to be driven home. In terms of what I would say is important, I have 4 tips for you. So you should plan your cash. You should set budgets, forecasts, pay particular attention to all your funding needs that you foresee, especially have contingencies. So you should always have a contingency built into your cash flow forecast. An area we've touched on already, so credit control. So make it easy for your customers to pay is another golden rule. Raise invoices promptly. Consider upfront payments, especially in circumstances where perhaps you need to outlay certain costs upfront. I think that's particularly pertinent to that area. Make sure you're negotiating with your suppliers for the best terms, and consider whether you can spread the cost. And ultimately, lots of people go for bulk buying because they may get a discount, but that necessarily might not be the right thing for your cash to have it tied up in those areas. So think carefully when you're making decisions of that nature. And I suppose ultimately the 4th one is monitor all of the above regularly. Okay,
now I mentioned at the outset of the interview that you serve on some boards, and you're on the board of AM Bid, my own business, as our non-executive finance director. What would you say the benefits are to SME businesses of having that non-executive finance director? at board level?
So yeah, so I've got into this area of accountancy in the last 5 to 6 years, and what I see is that it gives a fresh and impartial perspective, because I'm not involved in the day-to-day running of any of those businesses, and I'm actually from the outside looking in. So I have experience of other businesses and what they're doing, and I can challenge the owners. So I act as a sounding board, but also contribute to the development of business strategy. So I think it just gives ultimately another arm and strength to the balance of the board. Obviously, from a board's perspective, I would expect they see, well, I'm there to verify the finances and the financial information and present it in a way that they understand as key point number one. So it gives you the strength in that. In many small businesses previously, and not previously, but just now as well, couldn't afford to have a finance team or a finance director. So the virtual option gives you all the skills and the expertise without the commitment of an employment contract and employment cost. And I think those are the biggest benefits that I see.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I'd say they're very similar to the benefits of bringing in external bid help. Often businesses maybe doing several bids a year. It doesn't make sense for them to have a full bid team, standing there waiting on work coming in, and they can bring in experts. And I think it's exactly the same. We as a business sort of turning over about £1 million a year, we don't have the need for a full-time finance director at this stage. Maybe if the company gets bigger, we will need that eventually, but we don't need it at the moment. So it makes much more commercial sense to still get that knowledge, expertise, insights, but only to pay for it at the times that we actually need it. Now, I know that you work with a number of growth businesses, AM Bid just being one of them. What would you say are the particular financial challenges that growth businesses face, and how can a good accountant help them?
Well, I think the biggest challenge overall is that there are so many challenges for them. They have so many hats on in terms of trying to grow their business. But financially, I think points that we've already touched on, so cash flow and financial management, because actually, ultimately, it's cash constraints that can be the biggest factor that limit growth. And the other hand, in many cases, growing too quickly, so over trading, can be the ultimate fatal point to a business. So I think, yeah, there's a lot to deal with in terms of the management. So I think they have to plan ahead and identify how they're going to grow, what funding they need to require to grow, whether that growth is organically or by acquisition and merger, it will all need. So that's where an accountant comes into the fore, because they can do profit and cash flow projections and identify areas of funding, and ultimately through our contacts also point in the direction of where possibly you could obtain that funding.
Yeah, and I think for the journey that growth businesses go on, you obviously start small, your business gets bigger. We started small. We started with a local firm of accountants that were very, very good for us for the first 5 years. But we then made a decision that we were, operating, we were a larger business, and we wanted to sort of play in a different league, as it were. So we wanted to choose a larger firm of accountants to actually handle our growing business. So for businesses thinking of selecting a new accountancy firm to work with, what are the main things do you think, Carrie, that they should actually be looking for?
So ultimately, you've identified one of the main things there. So know what type of service you want and who can deliver it, and identify any needs or speciality service that you may need, and make sure that they have the background and the history to be able to deliver that. From a personal point of view, I think personal connection is very important and should sit quite high up in the priorities. So can you openly talk with them? Do they talk a language that you understand? I don't know how many clients I've spoken through their accounts for the first time, and previously they've never understood. It's just been a page of numbers. So I think that is very important in terms of the relationship and how you both deliver that. One thing I would is, are they certified? So anyone can use the term accountant, but you should always check if they're actually qualified to be an accountant. Value for money would be a business owner's ultimate look for, and seek out recommendations from contacts or friends.
Yeah, very good. I mean, people buy from people, and I think the people aspect of it was vital for us in sort of making that decision to go with Thomson Cooper. You know, we'd met a number of the other partners as well, and you know, we just felt that the relationship was good, your expertise was good, and you know, it then was a bit of a kind of no-brainer really to go with Thomson Cooper for us, rather than to maybe take a step and go with, you know, a business that we just didn't know at all. And also you have very successfully in the past put on things like, you know, budget breakfast briefings and things like that really explain, you know, the changes in taxation and other things, but do it in sort of layperson's terms, and that definitely worked for us as well. Now, what do you think the main financial trends are going to be in the 2020s decade? We're basically the first 18 months into the 2020s, but we've got a whole decade in front of us. What do you think the main financial trends are going to be?
So you're asking me for that crystal ball again, Andrew. Well, yes, I mean, the first 18 months have got off to quite a staggering start. This year will be a year of transition as the economy tries to stabilise post-pandemic, post-Brexit. And obviously, depending on today's election result for Scotland, we could be facing the prospect of another independence referendum in the short term. So that could dent things like consumer and business confidence, and no doubt they will have an impact over the course of the decade. As we look further forward, we know we have to repay the debt at some point, so the Chancellor's already outlined that tax will have to rise in order to do that. So I think there's a lot to consider for the next decade. If the last year shows us anything, is that business and people have shown great resilience, and I think we will bounce back, but I think it will be a bumpy ride over the course of the next 10 years.
Okay, and finally, if you could give 3 pieces of financial advice to a small, medium enterprise business, what would these 3 pieces of financial advice be?
Pretty much what I've talked about throughout the course of this 30 minutes. Cash is oxygen, so know how much money you have to stay afloat and how long that can last you for. Planning is the best tool, and ultimately planning your exit from the very beginning is a good tool as a good thing to think about. And be practical about your business. Understand the importance of money and in terms of generating and managing profits.
Great. So some really good tips there. And this has been really a very interesting, informative run through the economic and financial considerations for bidders. So thank you very much. Tomorrow, I'm doing LinkedIn Live number 75. I can't believe it, 75. And we're going to be talking about mental health and well-being at work. And I'll be joined tomorrow by Scott Newby from Come Alive UK and Newby Core Consulting, and he's also a podcast host now as well. So lots of interesting things to talk about around the subject of mental health and well-being at work tomorrow at 12 noon here on the LinkedIn Live channel. So thank you very much, Carrie, for coming in to join me today.
Thank you, Andrew.